Hey sailors, welcome to the crew. I'm Sailor Janda, and this is my Let's Play of Rule the Waves 3 as Great Britain. This will be the 1920 All the World's Fighting Ships special. Um, Bearing in mind that I saved in November of 1920 while we were at war with Russia and Austria, so things have changed quite a bit since this, but close enough. So, starting as usual, well, let's take a look at fleet tonnages. Overall, we do still have the largest tonnage in the world by a pretty considerable margin, 931,000 to 803,000 over the US, although they have a larger budget than us now. Then behind us and the US, we have Germany, France, just barely ahead of Japan, who are just barely ahead of Italy, and then Austria-Hungary, then Russia. They've suffered from the war with us, obviously, and finally Spain. So, starting as usual with destroyers. Spain have some 28 destroyers amounting to 23,000 tons. Those would be primarily the... They still have 400 tonners with 4 3-inch guns. They have some 500 tonners with 2 2-inch, 27 knots. These are very obsolete. They have some 600 tonners with 4 3-inch, 27 knots, and 2 single torpedo tubes, it looks like. And the most, no, not the most recent ones, but they have some 1100 tonners with 2 5-inch, and it actually looks like 4 individual torpedo tubes, but maybe it's 2 twin. Then 800 ton, those make 32 knots as well, which is pretty fast. 800 tonners with 2 4-inch, the 4 torpedo tubes, and 30 knots, which are more of a budget option, and that's pretty much their more... Yeah, these 1100 tonner types are the bulk of their current force, so they actually have a lot with 2 4-inch depth charge throwers, 4 torpedo tubes, and 33 knots. So even faster. And these are alright, but they still have a lot of the really old ones too. To be fair, we have a lot of 600 tonners still in our inventory at this date, so can't complain that much about their half a dozen 400 and 500 tonners, really. Then again, that's half a dozen out of 28, so... In fact, their destroyer force as a whole is horrific, even by their small fleet's standards. Just 23,000 tons is less than half what anyone else has. Except, of course, Russia, who, when they've taken a beating in the war with us, they're down to 43 destroyers amounting to 36,000 tons. They have a 300 tonner still in service, 20 years old, Sposobny. That thing's pretty hopeless. They've got a bunch of 500 tonners, 2 3-inch, 4 2-inch, 2 torpedo tubes, one with 2 3-inch, 4 torpedo tubes, a bunch with 4 3-inch and 2 torpedo tubes, all mostly making 30 knots. Well, the older ones make 27 and the newer ones make 30. They've got 900 tonners with 4 4-inch, looks like 3 individual torpedo tubes, and 31 knots, which are pretty nice actually. Then they reverted mostly to 1100 tonners with 2 5-inch, 3 triple torpedo tubes, and 30 knot speeds. Some of them have mines instead of the 3rd triple torpedo tube. And the most recent ones have, yeah, the 2 5-inch and the 3 triple torpedo tubes. And then these actually have 2 5-inch. Oh, that's a Corvette. Okay. I'm not going to bother to go over the Corvettes. They're mostly, well, some of them, like this one is, these couple are oddly large, but mostly they're pretty irrelevant. So next would be Austria-Hungary. They have 56 destroyers amounting to 61,000 tons. That includes a pair of 500 tonners, not the same class. Obviously very obsolete these days. Quite a lot of 600 tonners still, with some with 2 3-inch, 2 twin, no, 4 single torpedo tubes actually, in sort of a diamond arrangement. 27 knots, some with 2 4-inch, 2 3-inch, 2 single torpedo tubes. A couple of 700 tonners with 4 4-inch, 3 individual torpedo tubes. A couple of 800 tonners with the same, but they make 31 knots instead of 29. bunch of 1100 tonners with two 4-inch, probably two twin torpedo tubes and 31 knots speed. And then more recently, they have 1500 tonners, 32 knots, two 5-inch, three triple torpedo tubes, and 1400 tonners, which are mostly have two triple torpedo tubes, or these maybe have two quad even, or else it's four twin. It's hard to tell. I think it's two quad, but it's hard to see the tiny details on the diagrams of some of this. But it looks like two quad to me. Anyway, so they've got a lot of 14 and 1500 tonners. They're doing pretty well, actually. They do have a lot of tonnage, and a pretty large number, actually. They're outdoing Italy and Japan, so that's good for them. So then we have Italy. They have 48 destroyers amounting to 57,000 tons, which is, as I just said, less than Austria. They've got a bunch of 500 tonners with mostly 4 3-inch, two torpedo tubes, though there's some variations. They've got a bunch of 900 tonners with 3 or 4 4-inch and 2 or 3 torpedo tubes, 30 or 31 knots. They've got some 800 tonners with 2 4-inch, 2 twin torpedo tubes, 31 knots, and mines. This class of 1100 tonners, the Nembos, with 4 4-inch, 2 twin torpedo tubes, mines, 31 knots. Big class of 1200 tonners, which have 2 4-inch, 2 twin torpedo tubes, and make 30 knots. So I don't know if they're less cramped than the Nembos or what, but they seem worse for a tonnage increase. There must be a range or crampedness issue. And most recently, they're building a class of 1400 tonners, the Strales, with 3 4-inch, 2 triple torpedo tubes, mines, and 32 knots. It's not as good as the Austrians. They've got quite a few older 500 tonners still in service, and even their nicer ships are not. I don't feel like they're that advanced, but they're not terrible. Japan, 54 destroyers amounting to 51,000 tons. That includes a few 500 tonners with 2 3-inch, 2 twin torpedo tubes. 4 single torpedo tubes, 1 per side and 2 centerline, 27 knots. Some 600 tonners with 4 3-inch and only 2 torpedo tubes. Some 700 tonners with 3 4-inch and 2 torpedo tubes, 31 knots. And then some later ones which have only 29 knots but 4 4-inch and an extra torpedo tube as well. You have some 1100 tonners with 2 4-inch and 2 triple torpedo tubes, 33 knots. Those are fast. And these are 32 knots but have more mines. And then they have some 1400 tonners with 2 4-inch, 2 twin torpedo tubes, 33 knots. These are actually not very well armed for their size. They're just very fast. And then they built some 1200 tonner economy ships lately, which are pretty much the same, but not as fast. France has 58 destroyers amounting to 62,000 tons, which is a heavyweight tonnage, relatively speaking. They're close to Austria in terms of their average. They do have a few older 500 tonners with the 1 or 2 3-inch and 2-inch and single torpedo tubes. They have a few 600 tonners with 2 4-inch, 2 3-inch, 2 single torpedo tubes. One little class of 900 tonners with 3 4-inch, 2 single torpedo tubes, and then a big class, or several big classes of 800 tonners with 4 4-inch and 3 torpedo tubes, or 2 4-inch and 4 torpedo tubes, one or the other. Then 1100 tonners with those all make 31 knots. Then they built 1100 tonners, which have 2 4-inch, 2 twin torpedo tubes, 32 knots, which seems pretty standard. A lot of them are awfully light on gunpowder for what I would like, but seems pretty standard for the AI. 1500 tonners with 2 5-inch, 3 triple torpedo tubes. 1400 tonners with 2 4-inch, 2 triple torpedo tubes, and 32 knot speed. And then back to the ones with 3 triple tubes lately. There's not obviously that much variety in how people build destroyers, so I'm gonna get through them pretty quickly here. Germany then has 49 destroyers only, but they do amount to 99,000 tons. Well, they have 25 building right now, which is a huge increase in their force, and they'll have the most tonnage in the world when that buildup is finished. So let's see, they have in existence one 500 tonner, two 2-inch, 3 torpedo tubes, one 600 tonner, two 3-inch, 4 torpedo tubes, 3 900 tonners, 3 4-inch, 2 torpedo tubes. Then they have a good few 1100 tonners with 2 5-inch and 4 torpedo tubes, or 2 4-inch and 6 torpedo tubes, presumably 2 twins or 2 triples. Then they built a couple of 1300 tonners with those all make, no, a couple of them make 32 knots. Mostly they make 30. They built a couple of 1300 tonners with 2 4-inch, 2 triple torpedo tubes, 32 knots. Then switched to 1400s, which have pretty much the same capabilities, but 2 5-inch instead of 4-inch. Then they built some with no mines, but 3 5-inch and 3 triple torpedo tubes. Then went back to ones with 3 4-inch, 2 triple torpedo tubes and mines again. And currently they're building a massive, several classes of 1500 tonners with, it appears, 3 5-inch and 3 triple torpedo tubes, although I don't know what all of them will end up looking like. So that'll make them have quite a modern force once all those are finished, for sure. Now, the USA has 75 destroyers amounting to 86,000 tons, which by tonnage is the current largest force in the world. They've got one 400 tonner left, 4 3-inch, 2 torpedo tubes, a couple of 500 tonners, which are pretty much the same, 28 knot speeds, and some which have 3-inch as well as 2-inch, a couple of 600 tonners with 4 3-inch, 2 2-inch. Then a good-sized class of 900 tonners with 4 4-inch and 3 individual torpedo tubes. Then they went back to 700 tonners, which also had 4 4-inch, so apparently they could squeeze a lot more capacity out of it at that point somehow. Then back to 800 tonners, which have 2 4-inch, 2 twin torpedo tubes, and some mines, and are slower. They sacrificed a lot to get mines on these, or unless they changed something else as well, range or something. And then they went up to 1100 tonners with 2 4-inch, 2 triple torpedo tubes, mines, and a 32 knot speed, which are at least fast. And have a lot of torpedo tubes. Relatively. They built some versions of that had 2 5-inch, and then some that had 3 4-inch. They're basically all the same concept. And eventually, they upped it to 1500 tonners with 3 5-inch, 8 torpedo tubes, which are probably 2 quads, honestly, although I'm not sure. I think they're buried under the depth charge throwers, but it's probably 2 quads. And mines as well, and 32 knots, and they're building more of those to boot. Now, we have 79 destroyers amounting to 78,000 tons. We're going to be back to 80 soon after the war. We still have quite a lot of these 600 tonners, the anglers, 2 3-inch, 4 2-inch. I think it is 4 individual single torpedo tubes and a 27 knot speed. They're pretty dated now. I mean, the AI pretty much all have ships like this still, but they're all being phased out, and so will ours be soon after the war. Then we have a large class, I think currently the biggest in the fleet, the Fame class, with a 1,000-ton displacement, 2 4-inch, 4 3-inch, 2... I don't know how that works. I think it's 4 twin torpedo tube sets, 2 centerline and 2 on the sides, and a 30 knot speed. These are very heavily armed for their size. They're just a little slower. A lot of the AI designs would be 32 knots, but less armament. And then most recently you have the Goldfinch class, 1,400 tons, which have 3 5-inch, 2 4-inch, I think 3 quad torpedo tubes, or maybe it's 4 triple. I don't entirely remember. Yeah, well, I could look at the design. Hold on. It is 3 quad. So, yeah. 3 5-inch, 2 4-inch, 3 quadruple torpedo tubes, and a 30 knot speed. So again, they're kind of slower than the average is at this point, but they're also significantly more heavily armed. So I've got no qualms about continuing the Fame and Goldfinch classes in service for a long while. The Anglers obviously will have to be replaced soon, but they're not hopeless yet. And now we'll take a look at the cruisers of the world, which frankly, most of them are mine. I believe I maintain an absolute majority of all of the heavy and light cruisers in service in the world right now. In fact, let's see here. There are a total of 3, 4, 7, 13, 27, 29, 36, 42, 45, 47, 48, 49. Oh, it's so close. There are 49 total other cruisers in the world and 48 in my service. So it's awfully close there. Now, I have by far the majority of heavy cruisers. There's only 7 others in service to my 23. That said, most of mine are quite old and shouldn't really be kept around, but they're in the process of being replaced. Anyway, so Spain for cruisers, light cruisers, let's start with. They have 1. A 7,800-ton ship, Gravina, built 1912. 14 6-inch guns, 8 4-inch, 3.5-inch belt, 27 knots. Honestly, this is a really nice cruiser. Not perfect, but pretty perfect. It's actually got a good armor belt, a very nice speed. Like, the most modern cruisers will outpace her, but honestly, even my more modern classes barely outpace her. My more modern heavy cruisers don't even. So, yeah, I'm well armed, well armored, fairly fast. There's nothing wrong with Gravina at all, except that there's only 1 of her. And then they are also one of the ones with armored cruisers in service, only 2 of them, consisting of the 2 Catalunas, newly built. I think these are Spain's way of building battle cruisers on the cheap or something. They're very large armored cruisers, basically, and they are properly armored cruisers rather than heavy cruisers in most ways. They have the 4 10-inch guns in 2 twin turrets, plus 8 6-inch secondaries in twin turrets. 28 knot speed, 5-inch belt. The lack of, all of my armored cruisers will blow these away, and they're not that much more displacement, but 8-inch guns even, or 9-inch, will significantly outdo the primary armament of this at long range. The armor is good and the speed is good, but having only 4 guns on a new build ship in 1918 is wild, honestly. Still, they have literally the 3rd largest heavy cruiser force in the world there, so I can't complain too hard. Russia actually is next. They have a total of 2 light cruisers in service. The Nadezhda, which is 10 years old and interned, 6,000 tons, 25 knots, 8 6-inch, 12 4-inch, 2-inch belt, 25 knots. For her time, pretty decent. Not as heavily armed as I would make my ships, but there's nothing really wrong with the Nadezhda here. Especially not when compared to Novik, which is 5,400 tons, 29 knots, which is good, but armed with 8 5-inch guns and a 2-inch belt. 8 5-inch guns is not a cruiser armament, it is a destroyer armament, and I will stand by that opinion, so this is garbage. Really, though, it's been shown definitively in this war that's ongoing here that if the Noviks can escape us, then okay, they can escape us. But my latest cruisers are only barely slower than this, so they'll be less able to do that as I phase out my older cruisers. And any cruiser that's not slower than these will absolutely destroy them with that armament. So, yeah. Right, then Austria-Hungary has one of the larger, not light cruiser forces exactly, but has the 2nd largest armored cruiser force. They have 3 light cruisers, which the 5,300-ton Saida, 12, it says 6 5-inch there, but apparently it's 12 4-inch, with 5,300 tons, 28 knots, 2-inch belt. Absolutely pathetic armament. At best, I guess you could call this an anti-destroyer cruiser, but it's very questionable in my opinion. And then two Sigetvars, which are new built, 5,100 tons, 28 knots, 10 5-inch, and a 2.5-inch belt. These are also pretty rubbish. They are fast. Their armor's fine, but their armament is totally inadequate, in my opinion. They're building another one as well. And then they have the three big Budweis class armored cruisers, which they've held on to for nearly 15 years, which, to be fair, makes them new compared to most of my armored cruisers. 15,200 tons, 23 knots, 6-inch belt, 4 10-inch, 10 7-inch, 10 3-inch. Honestly, these still aren't that bad. They're very large, obviously, and are going to be very expensive when they're destroyed by battlecruisers. They have pretty excellent armor for a heavy cruiser or armored cruiser. They have pretty excellent armament for an armored cruiser. These are pretty much the prime, like, this is what peak performance for an armored cruiser looks like. It's just armored cruisers are dying. That said, the main reason is, well, my latest cruisers that are lighter will beat these because, again, of the only 4 main guns. But the 10-7s is a pretty dang heavy secondary armament, so it would probably be close, honestly, especially with how heavy these things' armor is. It's just my latest cruisers are also minimum 4 knots faster. Same with any battle cruiser being built now. But those are not that terrible even now, in my opinion. Obviously, they're easy meat for battle cruisers, but it doesn't actually happen that much in this game that you get battle cruisers just having a free shot to hunt down heavy cruisers. So usually I think it's a lot more worth it keeping heavy cruisers in service than the AI thinks it is, honestly. Anyway, Italy. Next, they have 3 light cruisers in service, which mount to Agordat, 4,000 tons, 29 knots, 4 6-inch, 6 4-inch, and a 1.5-inch belt. Look, it's fast. At least it has some 6-inch guns, but it's still fundamentally quite lightly armed and just very small. I'm sure it's cheap, and it'll probably do great against destroyers. It will not do great in a gunfight against larger cruisers, but at 4,000 tons, you just wouldn't expect it to. Then 2 Irides, which only have 5 5-inch guns. They are centerline, it looks like, but it's still. Well, then what are these? Maybe they're not all centerline? I don't know what that's about. 29 knots, 1.5-inch belt. Well, it's pathetically underarmed in any case, even if they are centerline. They're building 3 more cruisers as well, which are not a lot larger, so that doesn't really encourage me. That was Italy, right? Yeah. Okay, Japan actually has 6 light cruisers, which is one of the larger forces in the world. And they have an armored cruiser still. They have the 2 Naniwas, which are 6,100 tons, 28 knots, 4 6-inch, 6 4-inch, 1.5-inch build. Okay, very similar to one of the Italian ones we just looked at. And they're just, okay, but worse because they cost a lot more. These are 6,100 tons. The Italian version was 4,000 or something. So at 6,100 tons, you can't even say it's that cheap. I have cruisers barely heavier than this, which are definitely more combat capable, just slower, but. And then they have 1, 2, 4 Yayamas completed, and another 1 building. These have 6 5-inch, which looks like they're all centerline, probably, although maybe not. Maybe it's 4 centerline and 2 side, actually. It kind of looks like it's 4 centerline, 2 side, which is not as good. 28 knots, 2-inch belt. Again, just woefully underarmed for a cruiser with only 5-inch guns. They're building another one and a Yahagi, which are not any bigger. Oh, and they have 1 armored cruiser still, the Ton, which is indeed an armored cruiser from 1904, 12,100 tons, 20 knots, 4 10-inch, 14 7-inch, 12 3-inch, 4.5-inch belt. Similar to what I said about the Austrians, but worse, to be honest, because although their armament is very heavy, their armor is not as impressive, and their speed is worse as well. Significantly worse. Make them a lot more vulnerable. I'm not in too much of a place to criticize because my whole heavy / armored cruiser force is pretty much this bad or worse, but objectively I can recognize that these are pretty easy meat for a lot of ships around nowadays. which is why I'm scrambling to replace mine so fast. Well, and that's the thing. If they were all building a bunch of new heavy cruisers, that'd be one thing, but they don't. Any of them seem to have a plan to do so yet. So I'll feel free to criticize. France now has 7 light cruisers, which they have the Entrecasteaux from 1905, which is tiny, 3,100 tons and equivalent to that Austrian 4,000 tonner. I can't even be, well, not equivalent because it's only 23 knots. I can hardly even be mad at this thing because it must be so cheap, but it's also just kind of so useless. The only thing it might ever have done is screen the fleet against destroyers, or maybe scout on the cheap. But these days, not only is it not fast enough to be much of anything but a sitting duck, it's also underarmed and underarmored, so it's pretty worthless. Then they have 3 5,500-ton Quetelegons, which are 25 knots. 2-inch belt, 10 5-inch, with only two center line and the rest on the sides. These are very underarmed for cruisers. Basically, their broadside is 6 5-inch guns. They're kind of in an awkward speed position where they're not that fast, but they're not that slow. But they are compared to modern cruisers, so not useful. And then Davut, which is just the same thing, but with a thicker belt and faster and lighter. So I guess Davut is better in every way. Cheaper, better armored, faster. I don't know how they pulled that off. 7 years of technological development, or really 10 is how they pulled that off. So this is the modern version of that, and it's quite a bit better, but it's still underarmed. I mean, most cruisers will destroy you. Then they have 2 Souchets, which have 5 6-inch guns, and it looks like 3 of them are centerline. 2-inch belt, 28 knots. I mean, a 4 6-inch gun broadside is not really that adequate. It's similar to what some of my newest ones have, though, so with the speed, it's not that terrible, especially for how lightweight it is, but it definitely isn't that great. And that's an aviation ship, so that's the end of that, actually. I mean, these, if they're most modern, are not that bad. Then they have 1 armored cruiser, actually 1 heavy cruiser, new built, La Touche Treville, 15,500 tons, 29 knots, 8 9-inch guns and 4 twin turrets, 10 6-inch, 12 4-inch, 5-inch belt. This is a very powerful heavy cruiser, actually. It's big, to be fair, very big, but fast, well armored, well armed. The only thing is I wouldn't bother with the 6-inch secondaries if I were them. I would probably save weight and maybe pour on even more speed and just have a 5-inch secondary for anti-destroyer purposes, but the 6-inch secondary will make it even more capable against cruisers if it gets in close against cruisers. So it'll count for something. It's a very, very powerful heavy cruiser against other cruisers, potentially. I don't have any strong criticisms of it. Germany has 6 light cruisers amounting to 52,000 tons. Well, that's what the new one's building, but they have Hella, which is 6,000 tons, 24 knots, 8 6-inch, 4 to a side, 12 4-inch, 2-inch belt. Just kind of an outdated design now, but not a terrible one. It wasn't spectacular even when new, because a lot of ships had even more guns than that, but not terrible, especially for her size. This is more like what I would build the Medusa, or well, Niobe is the only survivor of the Medusa class, apparently. 14 6-inch with 2 twin turrets plus 5 to a side, 8 4-inch, 3-inch belt, 29 knot speed. This is quite formidable, actually. This is still one of the more powerful light cruisers afloat, most likely, right now, in pretty much every regard. And then 4 Emdens, which are the new ones, 5,200 tons, 27 knots, 5 6-inch, actually all center line for once, 2 3-inch, 3-inch belt. These are pretty nice. They're similar to some of the new ones I'm building. I don't I'm still not, totally in love with having only the 5 guns, but it's just hard to do any better with light cruisers these days. So at 5,200 tons, I don't think they did too bad with the Emdens, really. And then the USA actually has by far the second largest force of light cruisers, with 14 in service and another 9 building, which is pretty nice. They've got 3 Baltimores from 1907 to 10. These are 7,800 tons, 26 knots, 12 6-inch guns, including 2 twin turrets plus 4 to a side, 14 4-inch, 2-inch belt. Yeah, these are quite formidable, actually, because they've got a good amount of firepower, effectively a 8-gun broadside, which is kind of the standard. Pretty decent speed, not standing up to the very latest cruisers, but quite good for the era. It wasn't built that long ago. Well, more than 10 years. Very good for that era, actually. And armor is fine, so I like the Baltimores. Then 3 4,500-ton Columbias, which have 12 4-inch guns, apparently, and a 1-inch belt. They're very fast at 29 knots, but their firepower and armor are anemic, so those are not so great. 2 Des Moines, which have 4 6-inch guns in twin turrets, plus 6 4-inch, 28 knots on 1.5-inch belt. Again, very fast, kind of lightly armored and lightly armed. Not as bad as the Columbias, but still underarmed. I mean, very similar to the Austrian design, and a few others had it, but I don't love the design. It's just cheap. 1 Denver, which is 3,600 tons, 30 knots, 3 5-inch guns, and a 1-inch belt. This is a large destroyer that doesn't have torpedoes. It's actually just complete garbage. Maybe it's a mine layer, is I guess the most generous thing I can say about it, because it has effectively the guns of most 1,500-ton destroyers these days, and might as well have the armor of them, and the speed of them, but it displaces more than twice as much, and it doesn't even have the torpedo tubes of them. What does it even have for all that extra displacement? I have no idea, but it's terrible. Like, this is actually one of the worst cruiser designs I've ever seen. There's nothing this can do except maybe lay mines that a 1,500-ton destroyer can't do. I don't understand that even. Then they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Tucson class cruisers. 5,100 tons, 27 knots, 5 6-inch guns, all centerline, 2 3-inch belt. Yeah, this is pretty much the standard blueprint for the modern, late teens, early 20s cruiser. I just don't love the blueprint, but it's kind of what you have to do in this period, and it definitely works just fine, I think. Now they're building a bunch of Reno and Dayton class ships, which are probably going to be along similar lines. They don't have any heavy cruisers. And so that will bring us up to aviation ships, and then battle cruisers and battleships. Alright, so capital ships, but actually first let's take a look at aviation, which is very much in its infancy still, but everybody has at least a little bit at this point. Looks like, weirdly, Russia has by far the most. I suspect that's mostly land-based aircraft, but nonetheless, they have almost 300 total aircraft in service. We're at 91, which is third most, to be fair. Germany's at 123. Where do I even have 8 airships? I should get rid of those. Anyway, just to take a look through, Spain has a total of 4 small aviation vessels in service, these being Nerpio, Alcaraz, Santa Elena, and La Carolina, all of which are functionally pretty similar seaplane carriers with 5 aircraft apiece. All the seaplane carriers, detail differences in terms of this one is much slower. These are much larger and somewhat faster, but apparently this one makes 28 knots. That might be a lie, but they're all pretty much the same. That's 20 total aircraft. It's going to be mostly just scouting duties for all of those anyway. Then Russia has... To be fair, we did just establish they have a lot of aircraft. Not so many at sea. They have a total of 6 seaplane carriers with 5 aircraft apiece, which are all to the same totally standard model. And then 1 light carrier, Ismail, which is 17,800 tons. I presume a converted... I don't know if it's a pre-dreadnought. Maybe it's a converted battlecruiser, actually. Hard to say. 1909 build, so it probably is a converted battlecruiser. But anyway, 17,800 tons, 26 knots, 7.5-inch belt. It's definitely a converted battlecruiser. 6 4-inch guns, 11 aircraft. Honestly, hideously inefficient use of 18,000 tons for 11 aircraft. But it's at least technically a carrier. It's not a very good carrier. I mean, it is fast and well armored, for whatever that's worth. But it's not a lot of aircraft for the tonnage. That's kind of inevitable with the conversion. I don't feel like it's a fantastic conversion, even so. But it is kind of inevitable. Austria-Hungary has 2, well, actually has 1 seaplane carrier with 5 aircraft. Is building another one and a light carrier Falca, but that's not completed yet. However, that will put them honestly near the top, like top half in terms of carrier capabilities. Italy currently has 1 functional seaplane carrier, S. Pietro, and another one building but no carrier. Japan has 3 5-aircraft seaplane carriers operational but no carrier. France has also 3 5-aircraft seaplane carriers operational but no carrier either. Germany has currently has only 3 5-aircraft seaplane carriers building, but I noticed they are building 3 Elbe-class light carriers of 12,700 tons, presumably from scratch. So that will give them actually easily the largest carrier force in the world. Fair play to them. They've gotten a bit of a jump on everyone else with that. The USA currently has 2 5-aircraft seaplane carriers, Symbol and Triumph, and 1 light carrier, which I'm fairly sure must be a battlecruiser conversion. The 20,800 ton United States, 27 knots, 6 4-inch guns, 9.5-inch belt, 16 aircraft. Not a very good use of 21,000 tons for 16 aircraft, but it's definitely a battlecruiser conversion. Which is kind of what you have to do to get your first light carrier. On the other hand, it's not what I did, and I think I made a much more efficient use of money. Which our 1 operational carrier currently is HMS Carnarvon, which is a converted armored cruiser. And it's true she only makes 24 knots, but she carries 11 aircraft on 9,800 tons, which is pretty much equal aircraft to the Russian and American conversions on half or less the tonnage, which seems like a lot less waste of money to me, because honestly, all of these conversions are objectively terrible, so you might as well not spend too much on it. So air power is still very, very much in its infancy at this point. There's only a couple of converted light carriers around. Austria and Germany are currently both building the first purpose-built light carriers, so fair play to them. Now, let's take a look at the battlecruisers. Spain currently has 2, these being Cristobal Colon from 1911, 20,600 tons, 25 knots, 10-inch belt, 8 11-inch guns, 4 twin turrets with cross-deck fire, 10 6-inch, 16 3-inch. It's not really that bad. It's not as fast as the most modern battlecruisers, and it doesn't have a very heavy gun battery, even by early battlecruiser standards. And the cross-deck fire's not great, but the armor's pretty good. I wouldn't call it fatally flawed so much as just typically backwards in the way most Spanish ships are. Then they have Pedro de Aragon, which, to be fair, is sort of more modern. 18,900 tons, 27 knots, 12-inch guns, 8 of them 4 twin turrets, 16 6-inch belt. Look, fast enough to keep up with most, maybe the very most modern battlecruisers. Some of them might be making 30 knots, but I'm not even sure about that yet. 27 is fine, I would say. 6-inch belt is bad. And I can't help but notice that the 12-inch turrets, 2 of them are just wing turrets in such a way that, well, they have a diamond arrangement, which means this isn't even really a dreadnought exactly. It only has a 6-gun broadside, period, under any circumstances, which is very bad. So that's a terribly flawed battlecruiser. Now, Austria-Hungary has 6 battlecruisers amounting to 136,000 tons, which is quite a step up. The oldest 2 of these are the Slavonian and Vorarlberg from 1910. These are 20,200 tons, 24 knots, 8 12s, 16 5s, 5-inch belt. These have exactly the same flaw as the Aragon, except they're not even fast either. 24 knots is very first-gen battlecruiser stuff. And the 8 12-inch guns are in a diamond arrangement, meaning she only has a 6 12-inch gun broadside, even under ideal conditions, plus a pitiful armored belt, so these are not very good battlecruisers at all. The remaining 4 are Ruritanian, Galician, Küstenland, and Crane, all built 1914 to 18 and all of the same class. 24,000 tons, 24 knots, 8 12s and 4 twin turrets, all centerline, 12 4s, 4 3s, and a 9.5-inch belt. Well, quite radically better. Not faster, not very fast, just overall. But an all centerline gun battery of 12-inch guns, and pretty decent armor for a battlecruiser means these are at least not terrible by any means. They're reasonable combatants. Now, I skipped Russia, actually. Forget how damaged they are. Russia currently has 5 battlecruisers amounting to 140,000 tons. I bet that's with the 6th building, so it's less, really. The oldest is Kinburn from 1908, 15,400 tons, 25 knots, 4 11-inch guns and 2 twin turrets, 10 5s, 12 3s, 6.5-inch belt. Speed's alright, weak armor, and obviously it's arguably not even really a dreadnought because it only has 2 twin turrets, fore and aft. It's basically a fast pre-dreadnought, except it doesn't even have the armor of a pre-dreadnought, so it's actually just a fast armored cruiser, I guess, is what it is. A particularly large one. It's not good. It won't stand up against any battlecruiser with a proper main armament. Then they have the 3 Navarins, Navarin, Rimnik, and Ochakov, 20,100 tons, 25 knots, 8 11-inch guns, 4 twin turrets, cross-deck fire, 10 6-inch, 16 3-inch, and an 11-inch belt. These are pretty passable, actually. Obviously, I don't love cross-deck fire, but that's sometimes what you have to do in the early days. They're quite well armored, actually, for battlecruisers. Reasonably fast. 11-inch guns aren't the biggest, but they'll do. So, obviously, it's not an all-conquering battlecruiser, but these are passable battlecruisers. And then they have a real monster with the newly completed Sinop. 32,300 tons, 29 knots, 10 14-inch guns in 2 twin and 2 triple turrets, 24 6-inch, 4 4-inch, 10-inch belt. It kind of looks like a bit of a weird gun arrangement with 2 effectively amidships, but they are all centerline. The armor is pretty decent. The speed is very good. So yeah, this is a fairly monstrous battlecruiser, actually. Over 30,000 tons. Very heavy armament, decent armor, excellent speed. Nothing to complain about, really, except kind of the gun arrangement, but coming from Russia and the AI, I will take it. So that will take us to Italy, which has a very large force of 11 battlecruisers amounting to 300,000 tons currently in service. The first 5 of these are the Paolo Emilio, Opio Traiano, Claudio Tiberio, Vipsanio Agrippa, and Caio Mario, built 1907 through 10. And these are 17,000 tons, 23 knots, 4 12s in 2 twin turrets, 10 5s, 10 3s, 8-inch belt. These are not battlecruisers. They are barely faster than dreadnoughts. In fact, probably some of the latest dreadnoughts are already faster than them, or as fast. They do not have any heavier armament than a pre-dreadnought, and their armor is sort of middling passable at best. So these are pretty terrible. They're basically just overgrown armored cruisers, and a real battlecruiser will shred these. And then they have the one-off Umbria from 1911, 21,700 tons, 24 knots, 8 11-inch guns, 4 twin turrets, cross-deck firing, 10 5s, 16 3s, 9.5-inch belt. This is much more passable, even if it is a one-off. A little bit faster, and enough to make it a little more justifiable. Actually 8 guns, even if they're cross-deck firing. Better armor. So this is much more reasonable. It's still an early battlecruiser, but it's much more reasonable. Then another one-off Pisa from 1911, 18,200 tons, 26 knots, 6 11-inch guns in 3 twin turrets, 14 6s, 12 3s, and an 8.5-inch belt. Well, look, it's faster, but it also loses a turret that it really couldn't particularly afford to lose, and it loses some armor as well. So I would say this is just worse, really. I don't think it's worth the 2 knots to lose a whole turret and armor. Although it's also just smaller, so they lost displacement. Then 2 Regina Elena and Goito from 1913-14. These are 24,800 tons, 26 knots, 10 14-inch guns and 2 twin and 2 triple turrets, 18 4s, 4 3s, 8.5-inch belt. These are pretty fast for sort of second-generation battlecruisers. They're very heavily armed and middling armor. They, I mean, their big advantage is their firepower, and they have got a lot of firepower. All centerline turrets, so nothing to complain about there. Their speed is good, their armor is not great, but it's not horrifyingly bad. So overall, a pretty decent pair there. And then weirdly, with their most recent class, Lepanto and Attilio Regalo, these are 27,900 tons, 29 knots, 9 12s in... What? 1 triple and 3 twin turrets for some reason. 14 6s, 4 3s, and a 12-inch belt. So, okay, obviously they've sacrificed gunpowder for armor here, and they have very impressive armor and speed for a battlecruiser, but a lot less firepower. I don't actually know if for a battlecruiser that trade-off is worth it overall. It kind of seems like something I would do, but I'm still not sure it's worth it. The 10-14-inch gun thing scares me a lot more than this. But this is very fast and durable, so it's not exactly bad by any means. I'm just not sure it will beat the 14-inch gunned battlecruisers, despite its heavier armor. Bit of a spin of the roulette wheel, possibly, depending who gets a crippling shot in first. They're also building 2 new 35,000-ton battlecruisers, which I suspect, due to spoiler, the naval treaty will never be completed, but maybe they were. I'll check when we get back into the campaign proper. Japan has 14 battlecruisers amounting to 343,000 tons, which by number, and I suspect by active tonnage, is the most in the world, as a lot of the US's tonnage is under construction still. So Japan has Tsukuba, Kurama, Haruna, and Haruna. That's a class of 4 from 1907-08. These are 15,700 tons, 23 knots, 4 12s, 2 twin turrets, 10 5s, 10 3s, 8.5-inch belt. Again, these are just overgrown armored cruisers, and kind of is reassuring to see that a lot of the AI tonnage is these just garbage overgrown armored cruiser battlecruisers that are pretty much worthless against actual battlecruisers. So they're definitely packing out the numbers with some very bad ships there. Then they have the one-off Icoma of 1909. 18,800 tons, 24 knots, 8 12s, 10 5s, 12 3s, 8-inch belt. 4 twin turrets with cross-deck fire. It's got first-generation battlecruiser speed. Pretty much first-generation battlecruiser armament as well. Decent armor, but not very exceptional. So it's not terrible. It's not anything special either. Then they have the one-off Congo from 1910, which is 19,900 tons, 25 knots, 8 12, 16 5, 6.5-inch belt. This is pretty much just worse in every way. I mean, it is technically faster, but it's also significantly less armored and just very badly armored. And for some reason, the 4 twin turrets, 2 of them they're now in a diamond arrangement, which means she's only got a 6-gun broadside. So that's just clearly worse, and I would far rather have Icoma. I don't know why they built this. Displaces more, too. Then they have Akagi, Amagi, and Kirishima from 1911-12. These are 20,000 tons, 25 knots, 8 12, 16 5s, and a 5.5-inch belt. Oh, look, they've made it worse. It displaces even more than Congo, has the same terrible diamond gun arrangement, has an inch less of belt armor, and frankly, I'm not remotely sure what it's even supposed to have gained from the extra 100 tons, because it's just as bad. It's actually worse. Where did the weight go? Long range or something, probably. But it was not worth it. Why? Japan, why? And then they have Mishima, Shirabishi, Katsuragi, Iburi, and Ishikari. So that's 5 cruisers built 1913 through 18 of the Mishima class. 24,000 tons, 27 knots, 6 14-inch guns and 3 twin turrets, 14 6-inch, 8 3-inch, 8.5-inch belt. Their speed is fine. Pretty much what's expected for a modern battlecruiser. Their armor is not great, but not absolutely horrible. The 14-inch guns are nice, but the choice to only have 3 twin turrets is very questionable to my mind, so I would not call these that good. Middling at best, really low. I mean, the 14-inch guns will hit hard, but I hate to build an alleged dreadnought with less than 8 guns myself. And I don't think that's a crazy take. I don't like this six gun business much myself. Then France has only 5 battlecruisers, spanning to 240,000 tons, but that's with a lot building. Speaking of building, Japan is building another Mishima plus a much larger Tokachi of 38,000 tons. So France has Dunkirk and Strasbourg from 1908. These are 17,900 tons, 25 knots, 4 12s and 2 twin turrets, 14 6s, 12 3s with a 7-inch belt. These are basically just your overgrown armored cruiser design again. At least they're a little faster than most of those, and a little better armored, perhaps, but they still only have 2 twin turrets, which makes them pretty abysmal. And then we have Aquitaine and Nantes from 1910-11. These are 19,400 tons, 27 knots, 8 11-inch guns, and a diamond arrangement, 16 5s, and a 7-inch belt. Well, look, at least they're fast. They'll need to be because they need to run away from any real battlecruiser because their armor is bad, middling at best, but really just bad. And their armament is also bad because they only have effectively a 6 11-inch gun broadside, so these are garbage. Like pretty much all the diamond arrangement ships. And then last they have Marseille from 1911, which is apparently under construction, but it's got 21,600 ton displacement, 24 knot speed, 10 11-inch guns, 10 6-inch, and 2 torpedo tubes. Assuming all that's true, the speed is fine, but not exceptional for 1911, so not that good. If the 10 11-inch guns are actually in like 2 twin, 2 triple turrets and all centerline, then it's probably passable, although not well armored, I would guess either, so not that good. If they're in a stupid diamond arrangement or something, then it's just terrible. And they are currently building 2 runes of 35,000 tons, a Bayard of 38,000 tons, and a Triumphant of 36,000 tons, so after not building anything for a decade, they are really making up for it right now. Apparently, we know that Bayard has 9 15-inch guns and an 11.5-inch belt, so that's going to be a bit of a monster, yeah? Although, I don't know if they ever actually finished her, but probably not. But she would have been a bit of a monster. So that will take us over to Germany, which has 9 battlecruisers, spanning to 212,000 tons, which is not that much average tonnage, I don't think. So they have Goben, Lutzow, Seydlitz, Moltke, and Derflinger. 5 ships built 1908 to 10 are still pretty much the core of the force. 21,700 tons, 24 knots, 8 11-inch guns in 4 twin turrets with cross-deck fire, 10 sixes, 16 threes, 9.5-inch belt. Actually, to be fair, I understand why these are still the core of the force, because they're really not bad. Obviously, I don't love cross-deck fire, but it works mostly. Their speed is first-generation battlecruiser. Obviously, new ones are faster, but it's not that terrible. It should still be faster than most dreadnoughts. Although some dreadnoughts will be catching up now. I mean, the 811s are not going to be spectacular. There are heavier and much more powerful battlecruisers now. But for the further generation, these are actually reasonably armed, reasonably fast, and reasonably armored. So they're not aging anywhere near as badly as a lot of the AI designs that I've seen from this era. And then they have the one-off Hindenburg from 1912, 22,600 tons, 26 knots, 8 11s in 4 twin turrets, cross-deck fire, 14 sixes, 16 threes, and a 9.5-inch belt. And these are faster. They don't have much else changed from the Goldmans, really, so they're still decent. The extra 2 years maybe means they get less forgiveness for still only having 8 11-inch guns, but they're not that bad. Then Graf Spee and Freya from 1913-14. These have 26,300 ton displacement, 25 knots, 10 11-inch guns in 5 twin turrets, 3 centerline and 2 with cross-deck fire, 12 sixes, 12 threes, and a 9.5-inch belt. It's getting a little ridiculous at this point. This is a 1913-14 design, and they're still using cross-deck fire. They're also still using 11-inch guns, both of which are not great, but the armor is good, the speed is fine. The firepower isn't that bad, but it's really getting a little underarmed at this point. I mean, the 10 guns is obviously better than 8, but for a 26,000 ton ship, I would really hope for 12 or 13-inch guns, I feel like. And finally, just built 1919, Rune. 28,900. Okay, come on now, Germany. 28,900 tons, 28 knots, 11 11-inch guns with 1 triple and 4 twin turrets, in the triple and 2 twins being centerline, and then cross-deck fire for the other 2 and an 11-inch belt. So look, it's the same design again. It's faster. They've added a triple turret instead of a twin. It's better armored as well. But it's still basically the same layout. And so first of all, they're still using cross-deck fire with a 1919 design. And second of all, they're still using 11-inch guns in a 1919 design. And both of those things are pretty much unforgivable, to be honest. They certainly have the capacity to do better than that. They're building 14-inch gun battleships in piles, so why are they not building 14-inch gun battle cruisers? Come on, Germany. The speed and armor are quite good too, but the armament is kind of unforgivable on a 1919 battle cruiser, so yeah. So that'll bring us over to the USA, which has 11 battle cruisers in service and another 5 building, which will give it 404,000 tons, which is easily the most, and it's just a pretty outrageous amount of tonnage. On the other hand, They have USS Saratoga, Lexington, Constellation, Constitution, Ranger, and Congress, amounting to what's that? Six battle cruisers? Yeah, six battle cruisers built 1907 to '09, which are 17,000 tons, 25 knots, four 11-inch guns in two twin turrets, fore and aft, 14.6, 10.3, and a 9.5-inch belt. And those are basically worthless. They're not slow, to be fair. They're not even badly armored. The four 11-inch guns means these are basically just another overgrown armored cruiser design, and they will kill armored cruisers, but any real battle cruiser with, 8 guns will kill them. Probably will kill 2 of them if they're lucky. So, why do these exist? I don't know why any of these exist. I think it's because the AI just didn't have the tech to have more than 4 guns, but something told them that they should start building battle cruisers, but they technically, for like the year or two that they're first built in, when nobody has real battle cruisers, they are kind of the kings of the cruiser fleets, but they age so badly. So very, very badly. They are not good now at all. They're sitting ducks. Then they have Yorktown and Independence from 1911-12. These are 22,500 tons, 26 knots, 8 11-inch guns in 4 twin turrets with cross-deck fire, 14 sixes, 16 threes, and an 11-inch belt. These are a lot better. These are more like the German design. They're pretty fast. They're quite well armored. Quite well armored, actually, to be fair. And their armament is not as bad, obviously, with the cross-deck firing guns. I don't love the cross-deck firing guns, and 11 inches isn't that great either, but it's definitely better. Then they have Intrepid, a one-off from 1912, 20,800 tons, 27 knots, 9 11-inch guns in 3 triple turrets, all centerline, 14 sixes, 12 threes, 9.5-inch belt. Still don't love the 11-inch guns, but they are all centerline now. It's pretty fast, pretty good second generation battlecruiser stuff. Armor's not as good, but not terrible, so overall, Intrepid is pretty nice and is probably a good step up. I don't love that they cut the armor, but it's still a step up. Then Bonhomme Richard, a one-off from 1914, 28,000 tons, 25 knots, 8 14-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, 8 5-inch, and a 9.5-inch belt. Well, this is pretty decent, really. I mean, it's got a lot of firepower. The armor is still not that terrible. The speed is pretty, decent. So, this is a pretty nice battlecruiser overall, actually. This looks a lot closer than most of the AI designs to something I'd build. I'd have more armor, but this is not bad at all. And then the one-off Hawaii from 1919. She's apparently under construction, but she's 30,600 tons, 29 knots, 9 11-inch guns, 14 6-inch, and torpedo tubes. I don't know what her armor is, which is going to be kind of critical. I'm guessing she's got 3 triple 12-inch turrets. I mean, she is faster, but overall it feels like a step back from Bonhomme Richard because of the drop in gun caliber. So I'm not that convinced by Hawaii for being built 5 years later and effectively having less firepower than Bonhomme Richard. Maybe she's got much better armor, but I doubt she has much better armor. Anyway, we are not in a strong position battlecruiser-wise, to be honest, with 3 battlecruisers amounting to 144,000 tons, which is pretty much one of the smallest forces in the world. Certainly by numbers, and not great by tonnage either. Kind of the price we pay for our massive heavy cruiser for. I never went over our cruisers, did I? I just went over the AI cruisers and called it a day. Okay, I'll go back and go after our cruisers in a second. Over our cruisers in a second. Our battle cruisers are in service. The 3 Indomitables, 1911 through 13. 28,100 tons, 27 knots, 8 12-inch guns in 4 twin turrets. All centerline, although this one is not really super firing, but all centerline. 12 5-inch, 10 3-inch, 11-inch belt, 2.5-inch deck. These are fast, pretty well armed, certainly much better than all the first generation AI battlecruisers, and quite well armored. So really, they stand up pretty well for how old they are. There's only a few of the most modern AI battlecruisers with 14-inch guns that beat them. The vast majority of what I just went over, the Indomitables will still beat pretty comfortably, actually. Especially the really garbage ones with tons of cross-deck firing, or the ones with 4 guns only, and so on. These will just stomp into the dust. So these are still not bad at all, in my opinion. Obviously, there's just not enough of them. We did lose one in the war, I believe, which is why we're building the 2 New Zealands, which are 29,800 tons, 27 knots, 8 14-inch guns and 4 twin turrets, super firing, centerline, 25-inch, 12-inch belt, 3-inch deck. These are fast, although not as fast as some of the latest AI stuff, but they're also very well armored and quite well armed. There are maybe some of the latest AI monsters that they're building will be more powerful than these, but these will pretty much stand up against anything that exists right now at the time of their being laid down. And I'm pretty pleased with them overall, especially as a lot of the AI monstrosities of the 36,000 ton type that they're building here are never actually going to be finished due to the naval treaty, which certainly helps things out. Now, yeah, it does occur to me, I guess I'll cut this if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I never went over our cruisers. My bad, I went over everyone else's cruisers. Yeah, so our cruiser force, in terms of light cruisers, we have 25 light cruisers, amounting to 244,000 tons, and we're in the midst of replacing a lot of them. So our current colonial cruisers stalwarts are the Sybils, of which we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 still in service, amounting to the majority of our light cruiser force. And these are just necessary because we have a huge foreign stations requirement. Each of these is 6,500 tons, 21 knots, 8 6-inch guns, with 2 centerline, 3 per side, 8 4-inch, 2-inch belt, 1.5-inch deck. These aren't fantastic combat cruisers. These days, realistically, they're very slow. I mean, they are very old. These are an 1896 design. So I'm not going to defend them as being very combat effective in the modern era, but they certainly fulfilled the foreign stations requirement, and they've been more successful than you would think in the occasional battle against raiders and such, because the AI just builds way too many super small cruisers with 5 or 4-inch guns, which these can beat. So, honestly, their main flaw is speed and just the fact that all their equipment is generally outdated. But they still kind of do the job. For combat intended light cruisers, we have the 3 Cordelias, built 20 years ago now, but these are at least fleet combat cruisers. 7,800 tons, 22 knots, 14 6-inch guns with 4 centerline and 5 to a side, 12 4-inch, 3-inch belt, 2-inch deck. These are still about as well armed as any light cruiser in existence. I mean, even the latest designs have like 5 or 6 centerline 6-inch guns. These are effectively more heavily armed than that, just older guns. The main flaw with them is that they're not fast enough anymore, but otherwise they still stand up pretty well in terms of firepower and even armor. Although they also don't have the most updated fire controller gun types, but yeah. And then we have their successors, the 3 Calypsos from 1908, which are pretty much the same design, except 2 less 4-inch guns, but 3 knots faster. And these stand up a lot better. Objectively, these are still some of the most powerful cruisers in the world, light cruisers that is. They do have the latest fire control. Well, they're not the latest actually, but they have director firing at least. They make 25 knots. They still have pretty much more firepower than any other light cruiser around. Their armor is still decent. Give them another 2 to 5 knots, and these would still be pretty excellent. Unfortunately, that's not the overall trend of cruiser design. On our most recent 5 cruisers, the Conquest class had to adopt the centerline guns that everybody's doing now. 7,900 tons, 28 knots, six 6-inch guns, all center-lined, so, well... I mean, the Calypsos have a 10 6-inch gun broadside, technically, but okay, these casemates and all are not that great, so... Practically speaking, the Conquests are not really that outgunned. 6-inch all centerline, 4-inch, 3-inch belt. It's going to be a lot more weight efficient in the long run. These are definitely a sort of evolutionary step along the way, and the addition of twin turrets will make these a lot more viable. But still, these are sort of the only really, really modern light cruisers around in the world that are actually kind of well built, with very few exceptions. So these are the pride of the fleet at the moment, and we're building another 5 as well to replace the Cordelias and Calypsos. And we're also starting the process of replacing the Sibyls with the 6,900-ton Minervas, which are 27 knots, 6-inch guns, all centerline, 8 4-inch, 2-inch belt, 1.5-inch deck. Basically, these are quite similar to the Conquests, except with less armor and a bit less speed, but long range and spacious quarters and all the other foreign stations fitting out. So these should do an excellent job of replacing the Sibyls for the next decade or two on foreign stations. Then in terms of heavy cruisers, we have 23, amounting to 272,000 tons, which is just ludicrously far and away the most in the world, and is pretty much the explanation for our battlecruiser disadvantage. Now, some of these do not really help make up for our battlecruisers, because, for instance, we have 7 of the Drake class still, which are pretty much just making up the numbers. These are 9,800 tons, 21 knots, 4 9-inch guns and 2 twin turrets, 10 6-inch, 12 3-inch, and a 4-inch belt. These are sitting ducks against any battlecruiser in the world, no question about it. On the other hand, they're also much lighter and more disposable than a battlecruiser. They pretty much still stand up against basically any AI cruiser around, except in terms of speed. And they really don't get caught out in the open against battlecruisers that much. So, I'm not saying they won't be scrapped very soon, because they will, but they're not as bad to still have around as the AI seems to think they are, having scrapped all of their own armored cruisers. Then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 of the Berwick class, built 1897 to 99, which are pretty much similar. These are... yeah, they just have 1 inch more of belt armor, I believe, and are otherwise identical. They're also very outdated now, practically speaking, but they also help make up a lot of tonnage in the fleet, and a lot of, you know, colonial stations and so on. And they still do an excellent job of screening and scouting and so on overall. They're just slow. That being said, those classes all need replacement, and the process of that has begun. We have 4 Andromedas already in service. These are 12,700 tons, 29 knots, 8 9-inch guns and 4 twin turrets, 12 5-inch, 4-inch belt, 2-inch deck. These actually have speed. They have more than double the firepower, practically speaking, or, well, double the firepower at least. And similar armor, so... yeah, slightly less than the Berwicks, actually, but these are the modern heavy cruiser. I mean, pretty straightforwardly, much, much faster by 8 full knots, plus double the firepower, plus better fire control. Did I ever put the latest? Nope. So, yeah. The Andromedas are just radically better, and these are the modern. These are still super viable. There's almost no battlecruisers in the world. There are no battlecruisers in the world that are faster than these yet. There's like 2 or 3 that I saw that are as fast as them. And these are actually faster than most of the light and heavy cruisers around that the AI has, so we'll be very good at hunting them down. And they cost like a third of what a modern battlecruiser does, so they're really not bad to have, although the AI doesn't seem to value them much. And then we have 4 Creases as well, with 2 more building. These are the sort of slightly reworked budget version of the Andromedas. 12,400 tons, 27 knots, 8 9-inch, 16 5-inch, 4-inch belt, 2-inch deck. A little bit more secondary armament, a little bit of saved tonnage, 2 knots slower. I don't actually love that. I don't know why I did it that way, but the 2 knots will not objectively cost them very much, I don't think. And they're just a little cheaper and easier to build than a heavier secondary armament. Pretty much they have the same fundamentals as the Andromedas. So that's our cruiser situation. Oh, and then I skipped pre-dreadnoughts, which probably because almost no one has some, but Italy still has 1 pre-dreadnought in service, Giulio Germanico, which has 11,900 tons, 18 knots, 4 12-inch guns, and 2 twin turrets, 10 6-inch, 12 3-inch, 8-inch belt. Not that great even by pre-dreadnought standards. I mean, typical armament, but not very much armor. Alright, speed. We have 3 pre-dreadnoughts in service, Ramilias, Hood, and Centurion, which are 21,200 tons, 18 knots, 4 12-inch guns, and 2 twin turrets, 12 8-inch, 16 3-inch, 13-inch belt, 3-inch deck. So these are, they're far too slow and underarmed really nowadays, but they do have a superb secondary armament. They'll still scare off pretty much any cruiser in the world, not a battlecruiser, and excellent armor as well. They're past their sell-by date. I did scrap them shortly after this, but they're still pretty much the most powerful pre-dreadnoughts ever built. So, I accidentally saved over the 1920 backup with the 1930 backup without half thinking about it shortly after this, without recording the battleship section. So you're gonna have to settle for most of the world's fighting ships for 1920. That said, almost all the battleships that we would have talked about were scrapped within like the next 2 years anyway without ever seeing combat, so thank the naval treaty for that one. Thanks for watching, sailors. Hope you enjoyed. New parts will be up every other day, or you can watch live on Twitch. If you did enjoy, consider leaving a like and subscribing. Have a nice day, sailors. This is Sea Lord Janda, signing off.